The crystal chandeliers cast a warm, honeyed glow across the polished mahogany tables of La Fontaine. A low hum of conversation, punctuated by the clinking of silverware and the soft strains of a jazz trio, filled the air. Friday night at La Fontaine was a symphony of elegance and hushed extravagance, a world Deborah navigated with practiced grace. Her black dress, crisp and simple, blended seamlessly with the shadows as she moved between tables, a phantom of efficiency in the opulent space. The scent of truffle oil and aged wine mingled with the faintest hint of chlorine from the nearby pool, a peculiar but not unpleasant olfactory cocktail that had become synonymous with La Fontaine for her. Each night, as she balanced trays laden with delicate appetizers and poured glasses of expensive champagne, a familiar ache resonated within her. It was the yearning of a musician silenced, a melody trapped within the confines of practicality. Deborah's true sanctuary wasn't amidst the hushed grandeur of La Fontaine, but in the quiet solitude of her small apartment, where a worn, upright piano stood sentinel in the corner. There, her fingers danced across the ivory keys, weaving intricate tapestries of sound that transported her far from the clinking glasses and demanding patrons. Chopin, Debussy, Rachmaninoff, they were her companions, her confidants, the voices that echoed the unspoken emotions swirling within her. La Fontaine, with its oppressive elegance and superficial conversations, was a necessary compromise. The tips were good enough to keep her afloat, to keep the dream alive. One day, she told herself, one day she would escape the gilded cage of waitressing and find her place on a stage bathed in the warm glow of spotlights, her music filling the silence. Tonight, however, the dream felt particularly distant. The air thrummed with an unusual tension, a palpable undercurrent of anticipation that had Deborah's nerves on edge. Mr. Grayson was in. Leonard Grayson, Raleigh's own enfant terrible, the millionaire entrepreneur known as much for his ruthless business acumen as his penchant for public displays off disdain. He held court at a corner table, surrounded by a gaggle of sycophants who hung on his every word, their laughter brittle and forced. Deborah had served him before. The memory of his condescending gaze, the way his lips curled into a sneer as he addressed her, still sent a shiver down her spine. She avoided his table as long as she could, attending to other patrons with a forced cheerfulness that felt increasingly strained. Deborah, darling, a word. His voice, smooth as polished steel, cut through the ambient noise, sending a ripple of unease through her. She plastered a smile on her face and approached the table, her heart hammering against her ribs. Mr. Grayson, she acknowledged, her voice barely above a whisper. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes, sharp and assessing, raking over her. Tell me, darling, do you enjoy this performance? He gestured vaguely around the room, his tone laced with a subtle mockery that made her stomach clench. He's toying with me, she thought, the realization sending a wave of heat rising up her neck. He enjoys this power he wields. I do my best to provide good service, sir, she responded, her voice trembling slightly. He chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down her spine. Service? Is that what you call it? Flitting about like a moth in a chandeliered cage, catering to the whims of the entitled? His gaze lingered on her face, a mixture of amusement and something colder, something that made her feel exposed, vulnerable. He sees me, she realized with a sudden jolt. He sees the dream, the yearning, and he wants to crush it. I need this job, sir, she admitted, her voice barely audible. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. The admission felt like a defeat, a surrender to his cruel game. Grayson's smile widened, a predatory glint in his eyes. Need, do you? How quaint. Tell me, darling, what other hidden talents do you possess? Can you juggle? Perhaps recite Shakespeare while balancing a tray of champagne flutes on your head? His companions erupted in laughter, their faces flushed with amusement. Deborah felt her cheeks burn, humiliation washing over her in a scalding wave. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the shadows and escape his merciless scrutiny. Then, a strange calmness settled over her. It was as if a switch had flipped inside her, silencing the fear and replacing it with a quiet defiance. She met his gaze, her own eyes steady and unwavering. "I play the piano," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. The laughter died down, replaced by a stunned silence. Grayson raised an eyebrow, his expression shifting from amusement to something akin to curiosity. "Oh," he drawled, his tone laced with skepticism. "And what makes you think anyone here would be interested in that?" "I don't," she responded, her voice calm and even. "But it's the truth." A flicker of something unreadable crossed Grayson's face. He studied her for a moment, his gaze intense, searching. Then, he leaned forward, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his lips. "Prove it," he challenged, his voice soft, almost a whisper. "Prove it, and I'll double your tips for the night." The challenge hung in the air, thick with unspoken tension. Deborah hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, a chance to reclaim her voice, to silence the doubts that had plagued her for so long. She took a deep breath and nodded. "All right," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I will." The crystal chandeliers of La Fontaine cast a shimmering glow across the polished mahogany tables, each reflecting the vibrant energy of a Friday evening. A low hum of conversation, punctuated by the clinking of silverware and the soft murmur of piano music, filled the air. Deborah, her black apron tied neatly around her waist, moved through the bustling restaurant with unpracticed grace, a tray laden with champagne flutes held steady in her hand. Her gaze swept over the tables, cataloging needs and anticipating requests, a quiet efficiency in her movements. Beneath the composed exterior, a familiar tremor of unease tightened her chest. Fridays at La Fontaine were always a performance, a tightrope walk between maintaining composure and succumbing to the overwhelming pressure of the wealthy clientele. The heavy oak doors swung open, momentarily silencing the nearby conversations. Leonard Grayson entered, an aura of self-importance preceding him like a tangible force. He moved with a predatory grace, his tailored suit accentuating his broad shoulders and confident stride. Two men, shadows in his wake, flanked him, their faces impassive, their eyes constantly scanning the room. Deborah watched, a flicker of apprehension igniting in her stomach, as he surveyed the restaurant, his gaze sharp and assessing, as if searching for the perfect stage for his next performance. Another Friday night spectacle, she thought, her fingers tightening around the tray. Just another act to endure. She'd seen his type before, men who wielded their wealth like a weapon, carving out a space for themselves in the world through intimidation and display. The air around him seemed to crackle with an almost tangible arrogance, a silent declaration of his superiority. He chose a table near the grand piano, a strategic position that commanded a view of the entire restaurant. Deborah's heart sank. Her section. The closer he came, the more palpable his presence became. The subtle scent of expensive cologne, the glint of a diamond-encrusted watch, the almost imperceptible sneer that played on his lips. Each detail painted a vivid picture of the man she was about to serve. "Deborah, huh?" His voice, smooth and deep, cut through the surrounding noise as he glanced at her name tag, his eyes lingering a moment longer than necessary. There was a predatory glint in those dark eyes, a hint of amusement that sent a shiver down her spine. "Sounds like someone with a lot of hidden talents." The words hung in the air, laced with an undercurrent of mockery. Deborah felt a flush rise in her cheeks, a wave of heat spreading through her body. Hidden talents. The phrase echoed in her mind, a painful reminder of her unfulfilled aspirations. The piano, her refuge, her passion, remained hidden, confined to the quiet corners of her small apartment. Here, she was just Deborah, the waitress, a blank canvas for the amusement of men like Leonard Grayson. "He's trying to provoke me," a voice whispered in her mind. "Don't react. Don't give him the satisfaction." She forced a neutral expression, her lips curving into a polite, professional smile. "I'll be happy to take your orders, sir." Her internal monologue raged. Happy? No. I'd be happier scrubbing toilets than catering to his ego. But the words remained unspoken, trapped behind the carefully constructed facade of indifference. Leonard Grayson leaned back in his chair, his gaze sweeping over her with a calculated slowness. It was a look that stripped away her carefully constructed composure, leaving her feeling exposed and vulnerable. "Champagne," he said finally, his voice laced with a languid arrogance. "The most expensive you have." He didn't bother to look at the menu, his disinterest palpable. Deborah's fingers tightened around her notepad, the urge to retort bubbling beneath the surface. The most expensive? Of course. It wasn't about the champagne. It was about the display, the unspoken assertion of his wealth and power. She took the order of his companions, their requests delivered in hushed tones, their eyes fixed on Grayson, as if seeking his approval. Deborah felt their scrutiny, their silent judgment, and the familiar knot of anxiety tightened in her chest. As she walked away, she could feel his gaze burning into her back. It was a heavy, oppressive weight that seemed to follow her every move. She forced herself to breathe, to focus on the task at hand, to push away the unsettling feeling of being preyed upon. Just another Friday night, she told herself, her voice tight with forced composure. Just another performance. The evening wore on, a slow, agonizing dance of forced smiles and polite conversation. Deborah navigated the crowded restaurant, her senses heightened, her every nerve on edge. Each time she passed Grayson's table, she felt his gaze, a silent, predatory presence that seemed to strip away her defenses. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was not just another Friday night. Something was about to happen, something that would shatter the carefully constructed equilibrium of her carefully ordered life. The crystal chandeliers of La Fontaine cast a shimmering, almost theatrical light across the bustling restaurant. The air, thick with the aroma of truffle oil and expensive perfume, vibrated with the murmur of conversations and the clinking of silverware against fine china. Deborah navigated the crowded space with practiced ease, her tray laden with plates of seared scallops and lobster bisque. Each step was carefully calculated, a silent choreography designed to avoid any unnecessary interaction, particularly with the man seated at table 6. Leonard Grayson. The name itself sounded like the clink of money, cold and hard. She'd heard whispers about him, all evening snippets of conversation about multi-million-dollar deals and private jets. He held court at his table, surrounded by a flock of impeccably dressed sycophants, their laughter echoing a little too loudly, a little too eagerly. Deborah felt a knot tighten in her stomach each time she passed their table. His gaze, sharp and assessing, lingered on her like a physical touch, making her skin crawl. "Just keep your head down, Deborah. One more hour, and you're free." She repeated the mantra silently, her fingers tightening around the tray's edge. She could feel the weight of his attention, a palpable pressure that seemed to suck the air from her lungs. It was a game he played, she realized, a subtle exertion of power, a reminder of the invisible chasm that separated them, the server and the served. Leonard leaned back in his plush velvet chair, a condescending smile playing on his lips. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, the ice clinking softly, a counterpoint to the forced gaiety at his table. He enjoyed this, the subtle dance of dominance. The way the staff, particularly this quiet waitress with the watchful eyes, seemed to shrink under his gaze. It amused him. He gestured dismissively with his hand, a flicker of boredom in his eyes. "Honestly, these scallops are adequate. I've had better in Monaco, of course." His companions chuckled obligingly, their faces carefully arranged in masks of agreement. He took another sip of his cognac, letting the warmth spread through him. But what can you expect? Raleigh isn't exactly a culinary capital. He didn't even bother to lower his voice, knowing the staff could hear him. It was part of the performance, the carefully constructed persona of the jaded millionaire. He enjoyed the subtle discomfort it created, the ripple of unease that spread through the room. It was a validation of his power, a tangible reminder of his place in the world. He watched the waitress Deborah. He'd heard someone call her as she cleared a nearby table. There was a quiet dignity about her, a resilience that intrigued him. He decided to amuse himself. Deborah approached their table, her heart pounding a heavy rhythm against her ribs. She tried to maintain a neutral expression, her gaze fixed on the empty plates. Don't engage. Don't react. She could feel Leonard's eyes on her, dissecting her, judging her. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken tension. Finally, he spoke, his voice laced with a calculated casualness that made her stomach churn. What do you do when you're not carrying plates? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Deborah's hand trembled slightly as she reached for a wine glass. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, the familiar sting of humiliation. He's doing it on purpose. He wants to see me squirm. Excuse me? She managed, her voice barely a whisper. She kept her gaze fixed on the table, refusing to meet his eyes. Leonard chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that sent a shiver down her spine. Come now, don't be shy. Everyone has aspirations. Hidden talents. What's yours? He leaned forward, his eyes glinting with amusement. Perhaps you're a poet laureate in disguise? Or a secret agent? His companions laughed, their amusement echoing the hollow clinking of their glasses. Deborah felt a wave of anger wash over her, a hot, prickly sensation that spread from her chest to her fingertips. He's enjoying this. He's feeding off my discomfort. I'm a waitress, she said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. And right now I'm working. She reached for the last plate, her fingers brushing against his. The contact, brief as it was, sent a jolt of electricity through her. She recoiled as if burned. Oh, come now, Deborah, Leonard persisted, his voice dripping with condescension. Surely you have bigger dreams than serving us mere mortals. I hear you play the piano. Quite well, in fact. He gestured towards the grand piano in the corner of the restaurant, usually reserved for special occasions. Why don't you grace us with a performance? Entertain us. The challenge was thrown down, sharp and pointed like a shard of glass. Deborah felt the blood drain from her face. The piano, her sanctuary, her solace, now a weapon in his cruel game. He knows. How does he know? The thought echoed in her mind, a chilling realization. She'd only played here a handful of times, late at night after closing, when the restaurant was empty and silent. It was her secret, a hidden part of herself she'd guarded fiercely. And now this man, this arrogant, condescending millionaire, was holding it up for public display, like a trophy he'd just won. I don't play for, she stammered, her voice barely audible above the restaurant's din. She wanted to flee, to disappear into the bustling crowd, but her feet felt rooted to the spot. Leonard leaned back, a smug smile playing on his lips. He'd seen this before, the flicker of fear, the desperate attempt to retreat. He enjoyed it, the power he held over her, the ability to manipulate her emotions with a few well-placed words. Don't tell me you're afraid, Deborah, he taunted, his voice laced with mock concern. Afraid to share your gift with the world? The air crackled with tension, the unspoken challenge hanging heavy in the space between them. Deborah's mind raced, a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Fear, anger, humiliation. And beneath it all, a flicker of something else. Defiance. The low hum of conversation, the clinking of silverware against china, the heady aroma of truffle oil and aged wine, it all pressed in on Deborah, a suffocating blanket woven from the Friday night exuberance of LaFontaine. She gripped her order pad, the cheap paper a stark contrast to the crisp linen tablecloth she was clearing. Leonard Grayson, the man whose table she attended, watched her with a predatory gleam in his eyes, a smirk playing on his lips. He'd been needling her all evening, his comments thinly veiled insults disguised as compliments, each one a carefully placed barb designed to draw a reaction. He'd started with her name Deborah. Is it? Such a nuncoman name these days. Reminds me of a piano teacher I had once. He'd then moved on to her job, questioning her ambitions or apparent lack thereof, with a condescending tilt of his head. Content here, are you? Serving drinks, clearing plates. No higher aspirations. Deborah felt a familiar tightness in her chest, a knot of anxiety that had been her constant companion since childhood. Ignore him, she told herself. Just finish your shift. But the words, her mother's words, echoed in her memory, a gentle reprimand. Don't let them dim your light, Deborah. The memory, usually a source of comfort, tonight felt like a burning ember of shame. Had she let her light dim? Was she truly content to hide behind this mask of quiet servitude, allowing men like Leonard Grayson to define her worth? So, the piano teacher, Grayson continued, his voice cutting through her internal struggle. She was a formidable woman, could make that instrument sing. What about you, Deborah? Any hidden talents lurking beneath that demure exterior? The grand piano, polished to a high sheen, sat in the corner of the restaurant, a silent sentinel. It was a fixture, as much a part of LaFontaine's ambience as the crystal chandeliers and the velvet drapes. Yet, for Deborah, it represented something more. It was a symbol of a life unlived, a dream deferred. She'd played since she was a child, pouring her heart and soul into every note. But fear, that insidious beast, had always held her back. Fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of exposing the truest part of herself. No, sir, she replied, her voice barely a whisper, her gaze fixed on the half-empty wine glass she was clearing. Grayson's smirk widened. I see all talk, no talent. The words, though seemingly innocuous, stung. They were an echo of every doubt she'd ever harbored about herself, every whispered criticism that had chipped away at her confidence. The knot in her chest tightened, threatening to choke her. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, the telltale sign of her rising anger. Her fingers trembled slightly as she placed the wine glass on her tray. The restaurant, with its opulent decor and its air of sophisticated indifference, suddenly felt like a gilded cage. She wanted to flee, to disappear into the anonymity of the city night. But something held her back. A flicker of defiance, a spark of resentment that refused to be extinguished. Don't let them dim your light. Her mother's voice, stronger this time, resonated within her. It was a challenge, a call to action. She looked up, meeting Grayson's gaze. His eyes, cold and calculating, held a hint of amusement, as if he were anticipating her retreat, her predictable submission. Deborah took a deep breath, the scent of lilies and expensive perfume filling her lungs. The noise of the restaurant, the laughter and the chatter, seemed to fade into the background. All that remained was the man before her, his mocking gaze, and the silent piano in the corner, waiting. It was a moment of clarity, a sudden understanding that she had a choice. She could continue to hide, to let fear dictate her life, or she could confront it, embrace the vulnerability that came with exposing her true self. Actually, she said, her voice surprisingly steady, I do play. The words hung in the air, a fragile challenge thrown into the face of derision. Grayson's amusement faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise. The silence stretched, a pregnant pause filled with unspoken expectations. Deborah felt a tremor of fear, but beneath it, a stronger current of determination flowed. This was it, the point of no return. She could almost hear her mother's gentle laughter, a sound that transcended time and space. It was a sound of encouragement, of unwavering belief. It was the sound of love, a powerful force that could conquer any fear. Deborah's gaze shifted to the piano, its polished surface reflecting the soft glow of the chandeliers. It was no longer a symbol of a dream deferred, but a promise of a dream waiting to be realized. She took another deep breath, the knot in her chest finally loosening, replaced by a sense of anticipation, of exhilarating freedom. Very well, Grayson said, his voice laced with a newfound curiosity. Entertain me. He gestured towards the piano with a flourish, a predatory smile returning to his lips. Deborah met his gaze, her own eyes now holding a spark of something he hadn't seen before, not fear, not resentment, but a quiet confidence that radiated from within. She didn't answer, But the subtle lift of her chin, the determined set of her shoulders, spoke volumes. She turned and walked towards the piano, each step a declaration of her intent, a rejection of the fear that had held her captive for so long. The restaurant, the people, the noise, it all faded into a blur. All that mattered was the music waiting to be unleashed, the story waiting to be told. The predator had become the prey, unknowingly stepping into a trap of his own making. The polished ebony gleamed under the soft, strategically placed lights, reflecting the hushed anticipation of the room. LaFontaine, on a Friday evening, pulsed with a low hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses a delicate counterpoint to the murmur of voices. Deborah stood before the grand piano, the ivory keys a stark contrast to the deep black. A strange calm settled over her, a quiet center in the swirling vortex of her anxieties. Just moments ago, Leonard Grayson, his arrogance radiating like heat from a furnace, had sneered at her, his words a barbed challenge disguised as a request. His eyes, sharp and calculating, had held a glint of amusement, the kind a predator reserves for its prey. He thinks he's broken me, she thought, her fingers hovering just above the keys. He thinks this is a game. But beneath the surface of her apparent compliance, something else was stirring, a flicker of defiance that refused to be extinguished. This wasn't about him. It was about her, about the music that sang in her soul, a language far more potent than any cruel jest. Taking a deep breath, she allowed her fingers to fall, a gentle cascade onto the keys. The first notes resonated through the room, a crystalline purity cutting through the ambient noise. It was a simple melody, almost childlike in its innocence, yet imbued with a depth of feeling that resonated with something primal. The conversations began to falter, the clinking glasses stilled. Heads turned, drawn by an unseen force. Deborah closed her eyes, losing herself in the music. This wasn't the bustling restaurant anymore. It was a vast cathedral, her music the only prayer. Each note was a breath, each chord a heartbeat. The melody unfolded, weaving a tapestry of emotions: longing, hope, a touch of melancholy, a surge of triumphant joy. This is who I am, she thought, her fingers dancing across the keys. This is what I was meant to do. The room transformed. The soft glow of the chandeliers seemed to intensify, casting an almost ethereal light. The faces in the crowd, previously animated with chatter and laughter, were now masks of rapt attention. Some closed their eyes, lost in their own private reveries. Others stared, mesmerized, at the young woman at the piano, as if seeing her for the first time. Leonard Grayson, who had orchestrated this spectacle, his lips curled in a smug smile, now sat rigid, his expression unreadable. The amusement had vanished, replaced by something else, something akin to bewilderment. The music swelled, filling every corner of the room, washing over them like a tidal wave. It wasn't just a performance. It was an experience. Deborah poured her heart and soul into the music, every note a testament to her passion, her resilience, her unwavering belief in the power of her gift. The final chord reverberated through the silence, a lingering echo that seemed to hang in the air long after the music had ceased. The room remained hushed, suspended in a moment of collective awe. No one dared to break the spell. Deborah opened her eyes, her gaze sweeping across the faces in the crowd. The apprehension she had felt earlier had vanished, replaced by a quiet confidence. She had bared her soul, and in doing so, she had found her voice. Leonard Grayson's face was a study in conflicting emotions. The arrogant mask he habitually wore had cracked, revealing a glimpse of something vulnerable, something uncertain. He didn't expect this, Deborah realized, a faint smile playing on her lips. He didn't expect the music to touch him, to expose him. The silence was finally broken by a single, hesitant clap, followed by another, and then another, until the room erupted in applause. The sound washed over Deborah, a wave of affirmation, of acceptance. It was more than just appreciation for her performance. It was a recognition of her spirit, her courage. In that moment, she knew that everything had changed. The world had shifted on its axis. The path she had been searching for, the one that had seemed so distant, so unattainable, was suddenly clear. The music had opened a door, and she was ready to walk through it. Leonard Grayson sat motionless, the applause washing over him like a cold rain. He had intended to humiliate her, to use her as a pawn in his own twisted game. But he had underestimated her, underestimated the power of her music. And in doing so, he had inadvertently revealed something about himself, something he had kept hidden beneath layers of arrogance and bravado. The music had touched a chord within him, a chord he didn't even know existed. And the resonance, though faint, was undeniable. It was the sound of his own carefully constructed facade beginning to crumble. The final note hung in the air, a shimmering thread of sound before dissolving into the sudden, shocked silence. Then the dam broke. Applause, thunderous and overwhelming, erupted from the stunned diners. Deborah stood, fingers still resting on the ivory keys, feeling the vibrations not only from the piano but also from the floor beneath her feet, the air around her thrumming with a tangible energy. It was a wave that crashed over her, pulling her under, a dizzying mix of relief and exhilaration. Just moments ago, she had been a shadow, a ghost in her own life. Now, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlights, she felt truly seen, truly alive. Her breath hitched in her throat, a strange mix of triumph and vulnerability. This was it. This was the feeling she'd chased in the quiet corners of her heart, the secret dream she'd dared to nurture only in the solitude of her tiny apartment. Had she imagined the way the music flowed through her, a conduit for something larger than herself? The applause continued, a relentless tide. She could see faces in the crowd, mouths open in astonishment, eyes wide with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. Had they truly heard it, the story she'd woven into the melody, the yearning, the fear, the ultimate release? A small, uncertain smile touched her lips. It was real. This moment, this feeling, it was undeniably real. From the corner of her eye, she saw him. Leonard Grayson. He wasn't clapping. His hands rested on the table, his knuckles bone-white against the dark wood. His expression was unreadable, a carefully constructed mask that hid what? Disbelief? Anger? A flicker of something else danced in his eyes, something akin to respect? The thought was absurd. Leonard Grayson, the man who derived pleasure from dismantling others, showing respect? Deborah felt a strange twist in her gut, a mixture of satisfaction and a lingering unease. His silence was more potent than any applause. It was an acknowledgement, a begrudging surrender. The applause finally began to subside, the echoes fading into a hushed murmur. Deborah took a shaky breath, her knees suddenly weak. The spotlight felt too intense, the silence too profound. She wanted to disappear, to melt back into the shadows where she felt safe, yet a part of her, a newly awakened part, reveled in the lingering attention. He finally spoke, his voice low, carrying over the whispers of the other diners. "Impressive," he said, the word clipped, devoid of warmth, yet weighted with an undeniable gravity. It wasn't praise, not exactly. It was more an acknowledgement of a force he hadn't anticipated, a power he hadn't been able to control. Deborah met his gaze, her own surprisingly steady. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the quiet hum of the restaurant. What was she supposed to say? "Thank you? You were wrong about me." The words felt inadequate, hollow. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson." She finally managed, her voice soft but clear. It wasn't gratitude she felt, not entirely. It was something closer to vindication, a quiet affirmation of her worth. He inclined his head, a slight, almost imperceptible movement. "You have a gift, miss." "Deborah," she supplied, her voice gaining strength. "Deborah Martin." "Deborah," he repeated, the name sounding strange on his lips, stripped of the condescension it had carried earlier. A muscle twitched in his jaw. He looked away, his gaze drifting over the room, as if searching for an escape. This was not the victory he'd envisioned. He had sought to entertain himself, to exert his power, but instead, he'd been exposed. The mask of arrogance had slipped, revealing the insecurity that lay beneath. A sudden, unexpected wave of pity washed over Deborah. This man, so accustomed to wielding power, was now confronted with something he couldn't control, something beautiful and untamed. Her own talent, once a source of shame and insecurity, had become a shield, a weapon. It was a strange, unsettling realization. It's a shame to waste a gift like that. Serving drinks, he said, the words laced with a bitterness that seemed directed more at himself than at her. Deborah paused, considering his words. They hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Was it a genuine observation, or another veiled attempt to diminish her? She chose to believe the former. Perhaps, beneath the layers of arrogance and cynicism, there was a flicker of genuine understanding. Some gifts, she said, her voice quiet but firm, are meant to be shared, regardless of the venue. She met his gaze, her own steady and unwavering. It's not the stage that matters, Mr. Grayson, but the music. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken words, a silent battle of wills. He studied her, his eyes narrowed, as if trying to decipher the meaning behind her simple statement. He didn't understand, not really. He couldn't comprehend the joy of creation, the pure, unadulterated pleasure of sharing one's gift, regardless of the audience, regardless of the reward. He finally looked away, a flicker of defeat in his eyes. The power dynamic had shifted, subtly but irrevocably. Deborah, the quiet waitress, had become something more. She had found her voice, not just in the music, but in her own self-belief. The restaurant, once a cage, now felt like a stage, and the applause, though faded, still echoed in the quiet spaces of her heart. The night, which had begun with apprehension and fear, was ending with a sense of quiet triumph. The music hadn't just silenced the room. It had awakened something within her, something powerful and undeniable. And in that moment, she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that this was just the beginning. The lingering notes of Chopin's Nocturne No. 2 in E-flat major still hung in the air, a fragile beauty against the backdrop of the now hushed restaurant. The silence, thick and expectant, pressed against Deborah's ears, a strange counterpoint to the roaring applause that had just erupted. Her fingers, still tingling from their dance across the ivory keys, curled slightly inwards, seeking the familiar comfort of her apron's rough cotton. The spotlight, no longer focused on her, felt like a phantom limb, its absence leaving a strange hollowness. She had bared her soul, a secret part of herself she'd kept hidden, tucked away like a precious jewel. Now, it lay exposed, shimmering under the gaze of strangers. A wave of dizziness washed over her, not unpleasant, but disorienting, as if the ground beneath her feet had subtly shifted. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a pearl necklace approached, her smile genuine. "That was breathtaking, dear. Absolutely breathtaking. I haven't heard Chopin played with such feeling in years." Deborah mumbled a thank you, her voice catching her throat. The praise, so unexpected and effusive, felt like warm honey spreading through her veins, chasing away the lingering chill of Leonard Grayson's earlier disdain. She hadn't dared to look at him during her performance, focusing all her energy on the music, on channeling the emotions that clawed at her throat. Now, she risked a glance towards his table. It was almost empty. His entourage, a flock of sharply dressed men and women, were already filing out, their faces a mixture of bewilderment and hushed awe. Grayson himself lingered, his back to her, seemingly engrossed in a terse conversation on his phone. The rigid set of his shoulders spoke volumes. Deborah felt a flicker of satisfaction, a small, defiant ember glowing in the ashes of her previous humiliation. A young man, barely out of his teens, stopped by her table. He had been sitting near the piano, his gaze fixed on her throughout the performance. "That was incredible," he breathed, his eyes wide with admiration. "You play like you're breathing the music." He fumbled in his pocket, pulling out a crumpled napkin. "How would you mind signing this for me?" Deborah's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just polite applause. This was genuine appreciation, the kind she had yearned for, the kind that validated the countless hours she'd spent practicing in the quiet solitude of her small apartment. A shy smile touched her lips as she took the napkin and pen he offered. "Of course," she whispered, her hand trembling slightly as she scrawled her name. As he walked away, clutching the napkin like a prized possession, a profound shift occurred within Deborah. The fear, the self-doubt that had always clung to her like a shadow, seemed to recede, replaced by a burgeoning sense of self-belief. It wasn't arrogance, but a quiet knowing, a deep understanding that her talent was real, that it had the power to move people, to touch their souls. Grayson finally turned, his expression unreadable. He caught her eye for a fleeting moment, a flicker of something akin to surprise, perhaps even respect, crossing his features before hardening into a mask of indifference. "Impressive," he conceded, his voice devoid of warmth, though a little melodramatic for my taste. He turned abruptly and strode towards the exit, his entourage trailing behind him like shadows. Deborah watched him go, the sting of his backhanded compliment barely registering. His words were like pebbles thrown against a fortress. They might clatter against the walls, but they couldn't penetrate the newfound strength she had discovered within herself. An elderly gentleman, his face etched with the wisdom of years, approached her table. "You have a gift, young lady," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Don't let anyone dim your light." His words resonated deep within her, echoing the sentiment that had been blossoming within her heart. It wasn't just about the music anymore. It was about recognizing her own worth, about refusing to be diminished by the arrogance of others. The restaurant, once a stage for her humiliation, had become a sanctuary, a place where she had found her voice, not just through the music, but through the quiet strength of her spirit. The compliments continued to flow, each one a drop of water, nourishing the seed of confidence that had been planted. They weren't just praising her performance. They were acknowledging a part of her that had been hidden for too long. Deborah's initial apprehension had completely dissolved, replaced by a sense of calm and purpose. The fear of judgment, the crippling self-doubt that had held her captive for so long, seemed to evaporate in the warm glow of genuine appreciation. She realized that the true victory wasn't just silencing Leonard Grayson. It was silencing the voice of doubt within herself. As she cleared the remaining glasses from his table, a discarded business card caught her eye. "Leonard Grayson, CEO, Grayson Enterprises." She picked it up, her fingers tracing the embossed letters. A strange sense of detachment washed over her. This man, who had tried to belittle her, who had used his wealth and influence as weapons, suddenly seemed small, insignificant. His arrogance, his carefully constructed facade of power, had crumbled under the weight of her music. She slipped the card into her pocket, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that true strength wasn't about money or status, but about the courage to embrace one's own gifts, to stand tall in the face of adversity, and to let one's light shine, no matter how brightly it burned. The restaurant, once a symbol of her ordinary existence, now felt charged with possibility. The air, still vibrating with the remnants of her music, seemed to whisper of a future she had only dared to dream of. A future where her passion, her music, could take center stage. The lingering scent of expensive perfume and fine wine mingled with the faint aroma of coffee, creating a strange but comforting blend. It was the scent of La Fontaine, a place she had once considered just a job, a means to an end. Now, it felt like a turning point, a place where she had shed her old skin and emerged, transformed. She looked around the restaurant, at the faces of the people who had witnessed her performance, their expressions a mixture of admiration and quiet contemplation. They had seen her, truly seen her, and in their eyes, she saw not just a waitress, but a musician. The muted city lights painted streaks across her worn, floral curtains, a stark contrast to the opulent glow of La Fontaine. Deborah's small apartment, a sanctuary built on thrift store finds and hand-me-down furniture, felt miles away from the polished mahogany and crystal chandeliers she'd navigated just hours before. She sank deeper into the worn cushions of her sofa, the springs protesting with a familiar groan. The lingering scent of expensive perfume, not her own, clung to her clothes, a phantom reminder of the evening's bizarre turn. Her fingers, still tingling from the ivory keys, absently traced the faded pattern on the throw pillow. He hadn't believed her, not really. Leonard Grayson, with his condescending smirk and perfectly tailored suit, had seen her only as a waitress, a cog in the machine of his privileged world. He hadn't seen the years of practice, the sacrifices, the burning ember of a dream banked within her. He'd wanted to break her, to add another notch to his belt of casual cruelties. But then in music, the memory of the stunned silence that had followed the last crashing chord brought a faint smile to her lips. It was a strange sort of victory, this public unveiling of a hidden self. The hushed whispers, the bewildered stares, the grudging respect that flickered in Grayson's eyes as he'd finally met her gaze. It was intoxicating. More intoxicating than the cheapest wine, more potent than the strongest coffee. For a brief, shining moment, she had been more than just Deborah, the waitress. She had been Deborah, the musician. A sigh escaped her. The spell was broken. Reality, in the form of chipped mugs and overdue bills, settled back in. The exhilaration began to fade, replaced by the familiar ache of longing. What was the point of a fleeting triumph, a momentary glimpse into a life she might never have? The phone's shrill ring sliced through the quiet, startling her. An unknown number flashed on the screen. Hesitantly, she answered. "Hello." A smooth, professional voice filled her ear. "Is this Deborah Miller?" "Yes, speaking." Her heart quickened its pace. "This late? Who could it be?" "My name is Alex Ramsey. I'm a music producer with Aurora Records." Deborah's breath hitched. Aurora Records. The name reverberated in her mind, a beacon in the dim landscape of her aspirations. It couldn't be Coldit? "Two was at La Fontaine tonight," Ramsey continued, his voice tinged with a hint of awe. "I heard you play." A wave of heat washed over her, a mixture of disbelief and burgeoning hope. He had been there. He had heard her. The world tilted on its axis. "Two don't know what to say," she stammered, clutching the phone tighter. "What you played, Ms. Miller, was extraordinary. Raw talent like that is rare. I've been looking for a pianist with your particular style for a new project." Her mind raced, struggling to catch up with the dizzying speed of the conversation. This was it. The moment she'd dreamt of, the moment that had seemed so impossibly distant, was unfolding before her. But beneath the exhilaration, a sliver of doubt lingered. Was this real? Was this some elaborate prank orchestrated by one of the restaurant's patrons? Or perhaps even Grayson himself? A twisted continuation of his earlier game? Ramsey's next words shattered her apprehension. "I'd like to offer you the opportunity to record a demo. Are you interested?" "Interested," she echoed, her voice barely a whisper. The word felt woefully inadequate. "Yes, Mr. Ramsey. Yes, I'm very interested." The details blurred as he outlined the next steps, the location of the studio, the date of the recording session. She scribbled them down on a scrap of paper, her hand trembling with a mixture of excitement and a strange, unfamiliar fear. This was it. A chance. A real, tangible chance. But what if she failed? What if she wasn't good enough? The familiar whispers of self-doubt began to creep in, threatening to suffocate the fragile flame of hope. After the call ended, Deborah remained on the sofa, the scrap of paper clutched in her hand like a lifeline. The city lights outside seemed brighter now, the darkness less oppressive. The worn furniture, the chipped mugs, the faded curtains, they no longer represented the confines of her limited existence. They were the backdrop to a new beginning, a testament to the perseverance of a dream nurtured in secret. Leonard Grayson, with his arrogance and disdain, had inadvertently given her the greatest gift she could have asked for: the courage to step into the light. The journey ahead would be challenging, filled with uncertainties and potential setbacks. But tonight, in the quiet sanctuary of her small apartment, Deborah allowed herself to believe. to believe in the music, in her talent, and in the possibility of a future where her dreams could finally take flight. The chipped porcelain of the sink felt cool against her hand as Deborah washed off the remnants of the evening. The scent of expensive perfume, a lingering reminder of La Fontaine's opulent ambience, clung faintly to her clothes. But beneath the surface, beneath the exhaustion and the lingering hum of the restaurant's energy, something else stirred. A quiet ember, banked for years, was beginning to glow. She'd silenced Leonard Grayson, a man who treated the world like his personal chessboard. His words, intended to cut and diminish, had echoed hollowly in the sudden hush that followed her performance. Had she truly, finally, found her voice? The Raleigh night pressed against the small window of her apartment, a canvas of deep indigo sprinkled with the distant, cold glitter of stars. The air, filtered through the aging window frame, carried the faint scent of damp earth and the distant thrum of city life. She'd seen a flicker of something in Grayson's eyes after her performance, not admiration, not quite, but perhaps recognition. It was disconcerting. He was a collector of rare things, she mused, paintings, sculptures, first editions. Did he see her as another potential acquisition? The thought made her shiver. She didn't want to be anyone's possession, not anymore. The old upright piano sat in the corner, its mahogany finish dulled with age, the ivory keys yellowed and worn. A gift from her grandmother. It had been her sanctuary, her confidant, the silent witness to her hopes and her fears. It had been silent too long. Hesitantly, she lifted the dust cover, the soft rasp of fabric against would sending a strange tremor through her. The exposed keys seemed to gleam faintly in the dim light, an invitation she could no longer resist. Her fingers, still slightly trembling, found the familiar chords. The first notes, hesitant at first, filled the small apartment, chasing away the silence. It was Chopin, the Nocturne in E-flat major, the same piece that had held La Fontaine captive. Each note was a breath, a confession, a release. The melody flowed through her, a torrent of emotion she'd held back for too long. It was fear and hope intertwined, vulnerability and defiance, a whisper and a roar. As she played, the apartment seemed to dissolve around her. The chipped paint on the walls, the worn rug, the overflowing stack of sheet music on the floor, all faded into the background. She was no longer Deborah, the waitress, the quiet observer. She was the music, the conduit through which emotions poured forth, raw and unfiltered. The final notes hung in the air, a lingering echo of what had been, what could be. Silence descended again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Not the oppressive silence of fear and self-doubt, but the quiet stillness of understanding. She'd spent years minimizing her talent, hiding it away like a shameful secret. Fear of judgment, fear of failure, had choked the music inside her, leaving her feeling hollow and incomplete. Tonight, something had shifted. Leonard Grayson's arrogance, his attempt to belittle her, had inadvertently become the catalyst. It had pushed her to a precipice, forced her to confront her own fear. And in that moment of confrontation, she discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. She was not merely a waitress who played the piano. She was a musician. The realization settled within her, a quiet, unwavering certainty. It wasn't about applause or recognition or even proving Grayson wrong. It was about reclaiming a part of herself she'd almost lost. It was about honoring the gift her grandmother had given her, the gift she'd almost thrown away. She closed her eyes, letting the silence wash over her. The city lights painted shifting patterns on her eyelids. The distant siren's wail, the muffled laughter from the street below, the rhythmic tick of the old clock on the wall, all blended into a symphony of life, a reminder that the world was vast and full of possibilities. She had a choice. She could continue to exist in the shadows, allowing fear to dictate her path, or she could step into the light, embrace her talent, and find her own melody in the complex symphony of life. The ghost of a smile touched her lips. The fear was still there, a subtle tremor beneath the surface, but it no longer held the same power. It was merely a note, a discordant chord in the larger composition. And she, the composer of her own life, had the power to resolve it, to weave it into something beautiful, something true. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. She knew that. There would be obstacles, doubts, moments of crippling fear. But the music was there, within her, a constant source of strength. And as long as she had the music, she knew she wouldn't be alone.